Comments. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Didn't take me quite as long to walk up here as it did last year, as some of you may recall. I'm crutchless, so I'm happy about that. I don't know what more I can add, frankly, than my rather uplifting comments this morning. For those of you who had a chance to hear them, they didn't paint the rosiest of pictures, and I think appropriately so. The challenges that the entire federal government, but certainly the Department of Defense, are going through right now are particularly perplexing and largely without precedent. We've had tough times before. I think there's a history there of doing them fairly well, but rarely, if ever, have we had these kinds of challenges at a time when our nation and our soldiers are still at war. So I don't want to belabor the points I made anymore, other than to just suggest to you that while I've listened to some folks talk in rather general terms about, well, if you look at the budget numbers and analyze them in a historical perspective, you're just taking the Army back to the budgets as they existed in 2003 or 2002, depending upon which opinion writer is making the point. But the real point is this isn't 2002 or 2003. And the costs we pay for things, like most all of you, have gone up significantly. In 2002 and for much of 2003, we weren't at war as we are now. And obviously the needs of our soldiers and their families are much more extensive, from wounded warriors to the requirement of family programs, than they were in 2002, 2003. So certainly I, for one, would argue that those kinds of comparisons are a fool's errand. But nevertheless, as I also said this morning, the Chief and I have made a commitment to ourselves and to the men and women who wear the uniform and their families, and that is, for all of the tough times that may lie ahead, whatever the Army end strength and its budgets may look like, we will never send a soldier into war unprepared, untrained, and improperly equipped. And we're going to do everything we can to be mindful of the lessons of years gone by, and be very cautious about ensuring that end strength is not a means unto itself, that things like training, things like proper equipping are absolutely essential as well. In other words, at all times do our best to balance this force. I put it this morning, we'll attempt to adhere to the wise path, but again, as I said, in these kinds of times of fiscal uncertainty, even the wise path is very treacherous. But we remain very proud of the men and women who step forward. We stand in deep admiration for what their families do and the sacrifices that they make, and I know the Chief feels this way as well. That's the kind of motivation, looking at those young soldiers and their families, that keep us all going. And we're going to do everything we can to do the right thing by them, because they sure as heck have done the right thing by us. So I'll end my comments there, and Chief, turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here. It's great to be here with you today. You know, as the Secretary said, you know, since I've been the Chief of Staff of the Army, it's been nothing but budget uncertainty. No budgets, continuing resolutions, no planning, wasteful money, wasteful programs, because we can't predict what budget we're going to have as we move forward. So we've had great uncertainty for the last 2+ years. The only thing that's been certain is the steadfast commitment of our soldiers. That has never wavered. Our soldiers have deployed around the world. They continue to deploy around the world. They continue to do their job regardless of the problems that we have here, trying to get a proper budget that allows them and allows us to use the money to support them. As I sit here today, we have soldiers in Afghanistan, we have soldiers in Jordan, we have soldiers in Kuwait, we have soldiers in Korea, we have soldiers in Guam, we have soldiers in Turkey, we have soldiers all around the world doing their job to the best of their ability, doing their job to defend this country, and that's what I'm proud of. I'm proud of what they do and what our leaders do and what they continue to do for our country, regardless of the uncertainty that continues to occur here back in Washington. And what the Secretary and I are focused on doing is providing them the resources and capability that allows them to continue to do the things that we ask them to do. I would just tell you that what I continue to look at is we have to start, we are looking forward. Regardless of where our budgets are, regardless of what we're given, we have to look forward. We can't wait. And so part of this conference this week is us beginning and ensuring that people understand that we are looking forward. And we're running many very important seminars this week, one on leader development, one on the future of strategic land power, one on regionally aligned forces, one on the Pacific rebalance, and family programs as we look to see how we're going to take care of our families, how we're going to take care of our wounded warriors as we move forward. So the Secretary and I will deal with the budget uncertainty. We'll deal with that within the context of the Department of Defense. But we have to look forward, and we have to make sure that we continue to give these great Americans who volunteer to protect our country what they need. And that's what I'm proud of, their steadfast commitment and their steadfast competency that they continue to show around the world. So with that, I'd be very pleased to get your questions.
At this time, we'll take the first question. Richard.
I think this question might be for either of you or both of you. Secretary Hagel ordered the services to cut headquarters by 25%.
20%.
20%? That was...
I ordered 25%.
Okay, you ordered 25%. Can you tell us where those cuts are coming? Are they going to be units, soldiers, civilians? How's that going to go, and when will they be in place?
Well, I'll defer to the chief after, but the headquarters cut is not directly intended to address units. These are administrative functionaries, and the ones that frankly play a very important role, but we think we can take down. Some, I'm sure, will be soldiers. A large majority of the folks that do the headquarters work are civilian staff. So we don't have an exact apportionment on that. We did the direction. I did the directive against headquarters organizations, and we'll see what the leaders come back as to how they would propose to go about that. So, but, you know, like everything in this environment, all segments of the Army are going to be touched. They're going to have to have impacts and effects across all of our units. I hear from a great number of my former colleagues about the importance of various programs, and I couldn't agree more. But even at that, even great programs are going to have to be restructured and done differently. And the chief and I felt very strongly that headquarters reduction was a place that we could just do things more smartly and do it with fewer people. So, Chief? So,
as the Secretary said, the Department of Defense gave us a 20% across the board for all the services. We took a look at that, and it was really for major commands, which is kind of 4-star level commands. What we have done in the Army is we're saying we want 25%, and we're going to go down to 2-star level commands. Why are we doing this? Because if we can save 4,500 spaces in those commands, that's one brigade combat team. Or it's an aviation brigade. Or it's something else that is important to us as we move forward. So So we're looking at that. When would we implement it? Probably somewhere beginning in 15 and beyond. But we're still waiting for results. I will tell you that the response we've gotten is very positive from our subordinate commands. They're working this very hard. They understand that we have to become more efficient and effective in our headquarters. You know, when we reorganized our brigade combat teams, one of the reasons we did that was we needed 3 maneuver battalions in a brigade, but we also eliminated overhead. We eliminated some of the overhead structure, brigade structure, and we're making it more efficient. Well, now we're going to do that at the higher level. That's the intent. So, you know, I think we're going to get some good savings from this. And for me, it's important that we do that because the Secretary has been very clear about this. And so we are working together to do that. No, I just use that as an example. I mean, I don't know yet, but it's going to be, you know, I believe we can achieve some significant savings in the thousands, and we'll figure out what that is.
Next question. Tony Bertucca.
Tony Bertucca from Inside the Army, InsideDefense.com. I wanted to ask you a little bit about a report from late last week about, you know, internal budget discussions and talk that maybe should all this happen, the Army will not be able to win the nation's wars. Could you weigh in on that, please, and sort of when will it, you know, I mean, clearly you've been turning up the heat with Congress. You have not minced words, but when will it be time to truly tell Congress, if you do this, we can't win a war?
Well, you know, we're going through a review now. QDR, we're going to take a look at all of this. And in fact, I got to leave here and go to one meeting about 1300 today to talk about this. And we're going to have several more meetings next month or so, a couple months, as we develop the QDR report, which is going to look at the defense strategy. And those are exactly the kind of things we're going to take a look at. And so we'll see. I mean, if we, you know, it has to do with the amount of money that we're provided. And there's going to come a time where we just simply don't have enough money to provide what I believe to be the right amount of ground forces to conduct major contingency operations. But we'll see. We're not there yet. But it's something that we're going to continue to look at and review, and that'll be part of the discussion that we have with QDR. I would just add, you know, there's lots of different opinions out there, and there's people that want to change how the Army fights, and they believe, you know, we don't need ground forces, we can do everything with technology, standoff weapons, missiles. I can tell you emphatically, I absolutely disagree with that. You know, I mean, I think that's a grave mistake if we head in that direction. I think it's irresponsible, frankly. Because we don't know what we're going to have to do. Do we have to evolve? Absolutely, the Army has to evolve. And we are going to continue to evolve the Army in order to meet the needs of this nation. But we're going to look very carefully to ensure that we have the right capabilities and hopefully the right capacity to meet what our nation needs us to do.
Tony Capaccio with Bloomberg News. So, Mr. McHugh, I wanted to ask you, what is the status of the steps you're taking to implement Pentagon IG's recommendations to you in August against General Caldwell and General Patton? They asked that you take appropriate action against them for their view, these two gentlemen allegedly blocking access to the Inspector General. So I wanted to get your take. And General Odierno, a separate subject, of all the bad things you've laid out that could happen in 2014, given that sequestration seems to be continuing, what are the top 2 worst case scenarios? Thank you.
Yeah, Tony, as I think you're aware, we're in the process of working through the final disposition of both the cases against Generals Caldwell and Patton. You correctly noted the IG sent us a report, referred it to me. I've reviewed its findings very carefully. As happens in senior leader cases such as this, I referred the findings to the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. He's the responsible 4-star for senior officer. First step, we're thereafter going to continue the process, and then ultimately, in General Caldwell's case, as a 3-star general, disposition will be under his purview, under the Secretary of Defense's purview. So we're working it. I can't give you an exact time, but we're getting closer.
Do you make a recommendation to Secretary Hagel in terms of what you think appropriate action should be?
If the Secretary wishes to entertain that recommendation. That's happened previously, and I fully stand by to have that be the case this time.
Tony, if I could, I would ask you to read that IG report very carefully and thoroughly, and make sure you understand exactly what it says, because it's important. You know, we don't use headlines and line grabbers. It's very important to read throughout that volume of that IG investigation if you have the opportunity. So what do I worry about? What I tell everyone is in 14, you know, because of what happened last year, we were not able to invest in our readiness, and so we had to stop training basically in the last 6 months of the year. Now we've had a shutdown. Now if we go to, we're now in a continuing resolution. If we go to continuing resolution plus sequestration, which is what we're planning, it's going to significantly reduce our ability to train again this year. So the worst case scenario is you ask me to deploy thousands of soldiers somewhere, and we have not properly trained them to go because we simply don't have the dollars and money because of the way sequestration is laid out, that it makes it more difficult. So what we're trying to do now is in 14, we are putting aside a certain amount of force that we're going to spend all our money to train on. But they're not going to be trained until June of next year because we have not been able to do that. So that's our goal. But that's been slowed up because we had shutdown. Now we're restarting that progress. So we're hoping by June of next year we'll have a capability that we've been able to put through our combat training centers that have been properly trained. So if a contingency comes up, we'll be able to deploy them and train them. Right now we have in the Army 2 brigades that are trained. That's it. 2. Two brigades, except those going to Afghanistan, obviously don't count. But even those going to Afghanistan, they're trained now to do training and advising only. They're not trained to do combat operations. They are trained to be trainers and advisors, do force protection, all of those kind of things. They are not trained as brigades to conduct combat operations because that's not their mission in Afghanistan anymore. So we have 2 brigades right now that are prepared if we have to do something. And we're going to increase that throughout the year. We hope to get to 7 by June. That's my biggest concern.
Next question.
Stu Magnuson, National Defense Magazine. Can we look a little bit into the past? Can you tell me or tell us the damage, tangible, intangible, that was done during the shutdown? I know the General just touched on one example. Do you have any facts and figures? And if you don't, do you have any good examples of what it cost?
Well, the most recent estimate we have, and it's a work in progress, is that it cost the Army some $150 million. I think that's probably a deceptive figure because it's an accounting figure, and it doesn't really assess the impact that had upon, for example, 60,000 soldier scheduled training events that we had to cancel. It doesn't really take into effect the 165,000 civilians that we furloughed from October 1st to October 4th, which of course was a follow-on to the total department furlough of earlier in the year, and on and on and on. So whether you're talking about actual dollars and cents or whether you're talking about the erosion of the kinds of things the Chief talked about, training availabilities, or whether you're talking about morale, it had a very, very significant impact that we're going to be dealing with for quite some time. You know, I think the Chief put it very, very well. Whether it's a continuing resolution and the misalignment of dollars we experience, I spoke about that this morning, or whether it's an actual shutdown where funds are impacted very significantly, what we are forced to do or not do is something that takes a long time to get back. We've had to cancel over 500 training seats for our aviation folks. Well, best case estimates, that takes 2+ years to recoup, and that's a best case. So virtually everything we have done doesn't get solved just because we received a continuing resolution. It's a continuing issue. It continues to affect the kinds of things the Chief has been talking about, general readiness across the force, and more importantly, if you're a combatant commander with an O plan or some kind of project you wish to undertake in your region, you know, the unavailability of forces is a significant missing aspect to national defense.
Well, I mean, I would just say, you know, functioning like this is just dysfunctional. I mean, you know, you can't, our contracts that we have to let don't get let on time, they get delayed, they become more expensive, and that's the cost that the Secretary said. It's hard to estimate what those costs are. You know, and then the morale of our civilians who just went through, you know, supposed to go through 12 weeks of furlough, they went down to 6 weeks, and then immediately they go to, you know, they're told don't come to work, the work's shutting down, the government's shutting down. Well, we did get them back to work, thank God. But the impact that has on our civilian force, I don't know what the impact's going to be. I don't think the Secretary knows. But if we keep doing it, and the threat's still over their heads, I mean, what's going to happen in January? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Are we going to have to do another furlough at the end of next year? We certainly don't want to, and we'll do everything we can to avoid it. But this budget uncertainty is causing great uncertainty for people, and it's just not fair to them because of what they've given so much to the Army and to the Department of Defense. It's not fair to them. So I hope we can get this straight. We're ready. We're ready to, we'll work with what we're given. We'll make the best Army possible out of what we're given. We just need to get some predictability, which we've had zero of for a very long time.
Sidney, you have the next question.
I'm definitely behind your photographer, sir. Sidney Friedberg, BreakingDefense.com. A question for both of you gentlemen. We've sort of touched on the continuing resolution, but that often gets overshadowed by shutdown, by sequester. It's a little more tricky to explain, but I understand that has a whole cascading set of bad effects across all the services. I mean, what are all the nasty little wrinkles of CR, an indefinite CR perhaps, or a year-long CR, worst of all, for your service?
Well, as we spoke about here this morning, and as I mentioned in my comments, it's certainly better than the alternative of no dollars, but as you just said, Sidney, it presents significant challenges. Not the least amongst them is the fact that your dollar amounts are generally misaligned with current needs. We don't have significant flexibility authority, and therefore if you have a budget that is locked into your previous year's budget, that's really funding your previous year's needs and requirements, not the current year's needs. The other thing I think you have to remember, look, by the time any budget is developed through the services, cleared through the Department of Defense, goes to OMB, goes through the administration, goes to Capitol Hill, gets through the House and Senate, it's passed and then signed by the President, by the time we're executing that budget, it's almost 3 years old. So a budget that locks us through a CR into last year's budget is really a 3-year-old budget. You can't run the most important military on the face of the earth locked into 3-year-old budgets. So without spending flexibility, which Congress has provided us in various measures over the last 12 months or so, but it was not without some struggle, it's just dollars, but dollars in the wrong places. Also, if you're looking at the last couple of years, compared to the presidential proposed budget, the CRs versus the adopted budgets were several $billion short of what we otherwise would have had. That doesn't always work out to be the case, but so generally less money, programs being misaligned. You cannot start new contracts, whatever that contract may be for, which is enormously problematic when you have an Army, as we do, that is trying to develop new equipment programs, is trying to develop new platforms, is trying to go out and be smarter, and sometimes that means entering into different contract structures. One of the things we have done very successfully in recent years is to execute multi-year contracts to purchase various platforms that saved us hundreds of millions of dollars. Again, under a CR, we couldn't execute a new contract, let alone a multi-year contract. So those are the kinds of challenges that a CR, for, again, the good that it provides versus no funding, presents to us right now. And once more, as the Chief has said, it's the unpredictability of that. the Army is in partnership. If you walk through this AUSA exposition over the next few days, see a lot of great industrial partners that we have. They need some kind of predictability so they can plot their way forward. It's not just a matter of the Army being difficult to manage under these circumstances. If you're a major supplier or even a mid-tier supplier, to not have predictability, to not know if the Army is going to have money in the right account or is going to have the legal authority to execute a contract isn't not just problematic, it can be crippling. So this is a problem for ourselves, for the units, and for the United States Army, but it's also a problem on the general economy because of the hundreds of thousands of partners in the private sector from which we make purchases. So, Chief, anything?
I would just add, so on top of that, over the last 3 years, we've been moving from a budget that had significant contingency operation funds because of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're slowly coming off of those. And part of that is putting some things back into the base budget. Well, with all the continuing resolutions and everything going on, it's very difficult to make that change. So that's added on top of what we're trying to do. And obviously the Army, having been the large majority of the deployed forces over the last 10 or 12 years, that's another big problem for us. So I would just add it's difficult right now, but we have to continue to work our way through it.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Brendan McGarry with military.com. Mr. Secretary, this morning you talked about how the Army is actually drafting 2 separate budgets for fiscal 15 and also 5-year spending plans from that point forward. Can you say at this point, or just provide a rough idea of what that top line is looking like for 15? We've talked about the troop reductions, but we haven't really talked about what the actual top line will be. And then secondly, you just mentioned trying to provide clarity to industry. What programs is the Army looking at as in terms of possible reductions? A lot of folks here have already started talking about whether or not ground combat vehicle will be in jeopardy.
To your first point, I can just give you the general outlines. I'm not in a position to give you top lines. Obviously, that's a presidential budget decision for fiscal year 15. Generally, we're working the POM based on presidential figures. And the second is the assumption of sequestration, which is, as I said this morning, still the law of the land. And that's true for both our POM submission and our budget submissions. Pretty significant difference between the two, obviously. And we have to be prepared, quite frankly, if Congress were to give us some sort of partial relief to execute somewhere in the middle of those. We're talking about the government shutdown and sequestration and CRs. We've already impacted about 485 acquisition programs. And by impacted, I mean negatively. So while we're not set at this point to make any announcements about the ground combat vehicle, I find it difficult to envision any significant number of our developmental initiatives that won't be affected, some very significantly, and some we will have to cancel. You just have to reprioritize in these kinds of times. And we're doing the analysis to try to make the best decisions in that regard. Others will have their schedules stretched out, which presents problems of cost and cost per units and possible non-McCurdy breaches and on and on and on, but we really have very little choice. We are trying to do everything we can to keep our investment sufficiently robust in S&T and R&D, because the Chief and I believe very strongly that's where your future modernization breakthroughs come from. I'm not aware of any particular technological game changer out there right now, but we need to be continuously looking forward. But ground combat vehicle, name your favorite acquisition developmental program, it'll probably be affected.
Michelle.
Hi, Michelle Tan, Army Times. Could you provide more information about the acceleration of the drawdown 490, including which BCTs might be inactivated this year and how that might impact soldiers?
Well, I mean, I think we're still, as you know, we're in the process of the budget cycles. With originally, we were going to get to 490 by 17. As we announced the brigades, the Secretary and I announced in June going to reducing the number of brigades. We are now taking a look at whether we speed that up to do that by the end of 15 versus the end of 17. We're still working through the budget process to decide that. So if we decide to do that, then all the brigades would come out of the force by the end of 15 that we announced. And why are we doing that? Kind of relates to that last question that was just asked. We have to balance end strength, readiness, modernization. And we can only take end strength down so fast. And we might be able to speed it up a little bit. But the bottom line is we're going to have this, we have this whole sequestration has to be paid. And so right now it's got to be paid with readiness and modernization until we get end strength to a level that we think is appropriate. And that can help us to maintain that right balance. And so, you know, we're looking at speeding that up, but we can only speed it up so much because in the end, we have to take care of our soldiers and our families. And so we got to do it in such a way where we're able to take care of them. And it also comes to a point where once you get above a certain number, you're not saving money anymore by taking people out because of the cost of taking them out. And so you've got to do that very carefully as you move forward. So we're trying to balance all of that as we go forward. And if we have to speed it up, we certainly will do that. And that's a decision we'll make as we submit the budget. And we're working within the building now. Yeah, and then the other piece, remember, is that all our end strength over 490 is in contingency funds. So it doesn't even affect our base budget. So until we go below 490, we're not even impacting the base budget, which impacts modernization and readiness. And so if we get to 490 faster, then when we go below 490, if we have to continue with sequestration, we'll be able to do that a bit quicker, which will enable us to get that right balance.
Ladies and gentlemen, last question. In the rear.
Andrea Shalal, Isa with Reuters. I just wanted to pick up where you were talking about some acquisition programs might be canceled, you know, all will probably be affected. Can you sketch out for us what you see from where you sit now as the top priorities, the things that are, you know, too important to have affected, any kind of programs that you're carving out where you say we really need this because of the age of the systems?
Well, again, the concern that we have is that even those kinds of programs are going to be impacted. I mean, we definitely have a need at some point in the near future for a next generation combat vehicle. And while we may have to look very hard at the path by which we're pursuing that, that doesn't make the overall need go together. So just because an initiative or an objective is important doesn't mean that whatever is being done to pursue that won't be affected. Similarly, networking and the kinds of activities we've been doing out at NIE remain absolutely critical to our way forward in engaging the soldier right to the edge of the battlefield and providing them greater sense of command and control, situational awareness, communication, information and data access, et cetera, et cetera. Those remain critical and amongst our highest priorities, even though we've had to restructure our activities out at the NIEs. So, you know, I'm sure the chief could name you other programs, but the point I'm making is those two initiatives still remain critical to us, and yet the way by which we're going to pursue them will have to be looked at very carefully and is being looked at.
I mean, the bottom line is, what do we need? We need to make sure our soldiers have the best equipment possible, our individual soldiers, that they have protective equipment, they have the right sights, they have the right weapons, they have the right capability to move forward. Then we need to be able to move them around the battlefield. We need something to replace the Humvee. We need to replace the Bradley. We need to continue to invest in our aviation systems, our UH-60s, our Apaches, our CH-47s. We need to make sure that in the complex environments we're going to operate in, that we have a network that enables us to pass information very quickly and down to the lowest level. We need all of that. Bottom line is we can't afford all of that. And so we're going to have to make some tough decisions. Those are our priorities. But we're going to have to make some, we're not going to be able to do all of those to the extent we wanted. And we might not be able to do, we might have to delay some of those till 4 or 5 years. And so those are the decisions that we face as we go forward.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you
thank
all.
you for attending the press conference.